Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. Coming to you from Studio B, WOUB Radio in Athens, Ohio. I am Jay Warmke.
I'm Annie Warmke.
Annie, the under the weather Warmke. And today we're going to talk about some of the headlines that are in the world of solar. And Annie suggested this because I do a weekly show Zoom thing called Solar Noon Tuesdays, and we do a recap of what's happening in the world of solar. And
you're the hippy dippy solar news guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I thought we would talk about this. Our subtitle here is How the World Changes Without Us Noticing It. So that's interesting. But this week, actually, there were a lot of things going on that I thought kind of gave an indication of what's changing, some of the things people are talking about. So I thought that would be interesting. We've done some of these about what are the great innovations of solar that are happening, things to look for in the future. But I thought this is more like a micro shot just to say typical week.
Yeah, well, solar. The news is different than, but we do have quite a number of podcasts that people want to go back and listen more deeply into the issue of solar.
Yeah, they're all on solarpvtraining.com. So,
or Spotify or YouTube or any of those places, any platform that you use.
Shameless plugs.
No, it's not shameless if people are interested.
Okay, so first item in the news.
I don't want to dishearten you, but if somebody's listening to this podcast, they are interested in that. It's not the other stuff where we're just talking and it's probably more interesting to me than you. Then they could just go. But there's a reason people tune in to this one.
Okay. All right. Well, then solar is definitely part of the whole world of sustainability. And of course, I'm a total geek on it. So a lot of this stuff's going to be new to you, Annie, since I haven't really talked to you about this.
Be still my heart. I'm holding back. Right.
So number one item that I picked in the news this week, there's a management shakeup at Toledo Solar.
Oh my! Who knew there was a Toledo Solar? The town of Toledo?
No. There's a company called Toledo Solar. Actually, it's kind of interesting because if you look at the world of solar, the number one country, far and away the number one country of producing solar panels is
Toledo.
No, China. The number two country in the world is Ohio.
We're not a country.
I know we're not a country, but if we were a country, if Ohio was a country, it would be number two in the production of solar panels.
We're so cool and people don't even know it.
Well, and a lot of this has to do with a huge company up in the Toledo area, came out of the University of Toledo called First Solar. And First Solar produces a huge number of solar panels, primarily used for utility scale projects. They don't really sell these
utility scale, meaning like for urban areas.
Well, like a utility would buy them. They put in acres and acres of panels. So as a homeowner, if you wanted to go out and buy a Toledo solar panel, you're not gonna get it. But it's a big company. Well, they've got a competitor that also came out of the University of Toledo called Toledo Solar. And Toledo Solar is trying to get into the market of residential and commercial of this type of solar panel. Well, back in 2004, Green Energy Ohio, actually working with First Solar, installed solar panels on the mansion of the governor. Then it
Ohio's governor in Upper Arlington, Ohio.
Right there in Columbus. Yeah. And so anyway, they installed those. They've been working fine for, 18 years. They decided now time for an upgrade. So they came in. This time they're using Toledo solar panels. So they took off all of the old panels, put on the new panels. Well, a technician from First Solar came to pick up the old panels so they could be recycled because good stewards, right? Found when he or she looked at the new installation, the panels they had actually installed, although they were labeled Toledo Solar, they had overwritten the serial numbers. They were actually First Solar panels.
Scamming.
They were saying they were manufactured in America. They were actually manufactured at First Solar's Malaysian plant.
Wow.
So then this led to a whole kerfuffle. And people started investigating, and there's a lawsuit and all this other good stuff.
Our poor little short governor, he probably didn't even realize.
So So anyway, no, of course he didn't.
No, I
he
mean,
wasn't
even
installing.
after they made the discovery.
So this is a lawsuit. So as a result, the president, the chairman of the board, the secretary, the treasurer,
Wow,
they're all gone at Toledo Solar, and there's this shakeup. But lest you think that First Solar is innocent.
Oh,
right?
no corporation is
there
innocent.
was, in another bit of news, an audit that found they were using slave labor in their Malaysian solar panel production plant. So now they're claiming, okay, this was a third party subcontractor thing that we know nothing about. And maybe to their credit, they did discover it and are taking action.
They should have known right up front.
Well, it's hard to know a lot of these
No,
things.
it's not, because if you are meeting with these people and they're going to be showing you where you're doing this and the kinds of people. I mean, nobody's clean in these places.
Well, big business is big business, and we always say small is beautiful, buy local. This is one of the reasons. Even though a company like this maybe most of the people who work there have the best intentions, maybe they're trying to make the world a better place, but there are always going to be practices in any large business that you would be ashamed to tell your mother about.
Well, right? My grandma used to say the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
She made that up? That's great.
No, she didn't make it up, and she didn't even pretend to make it up. But the reality is that when you're talking about this, it's a sad commentary that, okay, so the state of Ohio is the second largest solar panel producers, but we're not. They're producing Malaysia.
Well, they are producing, and we'll get to this.
They're producing it in Ohio.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why would it say Malaysia?
Well, they have plants in Ohio. They have plants in Malaysia. They have plants in, I think, Singapore. They have like three
they're just
manufacturers.
Dumb then. Why would they stick?
Well, it's a global industry, so you provide plants.
Well, specifically, this is the governor's mansion of Ohio trying to utilize an Ohio-based company.
That was dumb.
Yeah, I mean, politically, it was suicide, really.
Well, and it was probably just some making, brain dead and did something stupid.
Well, I assure you, not to drill down too much on this, but having been involved at different levels with government and being the head of NGO, that these decisions, like when there's a high-profile project like that, everybody in the company helped make that decision. Oh yeah, because they want to market it. They want to show that they've done this amazing thing and they're Ohio based. But
I suspect they finally, in the end, said, "Hey George, go out into the warehouse and grab those panels and take them over to the governor's mansion." They didn't go out and check serial numbers. That's just not something they would do. They would do the PR. They would do the, I'll pose for a picture, but I'm not checking serial numbers. So, but why did they have these in their warehouse to begin with? Yeah. That's the real question. Yeah. All right, let's leave that. Let's leave that one behind. All right, good. In the good news, maybe, who knows? We'll find out. There is a recent report from the Energy Information Administration. This is the U.S. government that tracks these things, that said that in the first half of 2023, 86% of all of the new energy that was put onto the grid comes from renewables. So that's good.
That's right? Shocking.
52% was from solar. So solar is king. And basically, we're talking about new generating sources put onto the grid. 13% came from wind. And a new category that's just showing up really in the last year or so are batteries. And 17% of all of the new energy generating sources were batteries. So a lot of these utilities are putting big battery banks in to harness the wind and the reserve. And then when it's
at its peak.
Yeah, so when it's overly abundant.
Have a reserve of energy for when they have peak times, right?
Right.
And so has been a lot this year with the incredibly extreme weather that a lot of places have had in this country.
Right. And when we get into, we've talked about virtual power plants, when you start seeing a lot of electric cars now integrated together and basically amalgamated to form a very large battery bank, that's going to be another storage device that's integrated into the grid.
So, like, if you all lived in the same neighborhood or
Wouldn't even
something?
need to be that. It could just be 100,000 cars feeding power into the grid. Power
Oh,
comes
okay.
off the grid
Anywhere.
anywhere,
Yeah.
anywhere. So
Okay.
that's a Futurama kind of thing. Future being
Tomorrow.
next year, 2 years from now.
Quicker than AI.
Yeah, now this is one that I know is going to get your goat. Let me find the
I
details
don't
here.
have my goat
Uh,
gotten.
a new study, and I think the study was, I forget who did the study, but anyway, a credible source has found that 80% of all of the capital investment in renewable energy that was made possible by the Inflation Reduction
Yes,
Act,
it's in red
it's
states,
going to Republican districts
and
and
they're going to take
Republican
credit.
states.
But wait,
Every single one of those politicians voted against it.
I know, but you know what's incredible? Because I drive through the countryside from our farm to another farm to get a feed, organic feed, and there are signs everywhere against solar farms
Stop
on
solar, stop wind.
on prime farmland.
Yeah. And that's a secondary issue. And I kind of agree with them. But it's being directed by fossil fuel industry saying, okay, here's something we
Yes,
can rally
absolutely.
people around. But it is a fair point. Why
Well,
are we
but
using prime
all
farmland for
right,
solar
but that
first?
assumes, and I know a little bit about this because I'm getting ready to consult on a big project that's dealing with this. That assumes that you're not going to keep farming because, for example, the project that I'm looking at has hemp growing underneath of the panels, and then they're using sheep in the other. It's a community utility scale
Right.
model, and so they're just assuming it can't happen. But countries like France have
Oh
done a
yeah.
lot of experimentation with agriculture land being utilized dual purpose, if you will, where there are lots of panels, but then they're growing things and how they're placed on the land
Right.
has a lot to
It's
do with
actually
that.
known as agrivoltaics, and
Right.
and it's a big thing. And you're right, that's a fair point. But I would say that there's a lot of land out there that could be used for solar first. Like they were gray fields, which are concreted shopping mall parking
Yeah.
lots.
Or even brown fields, tons and tons of
Yeah,
brown
old
fields.
abandoned industrial sites. There are abandoned coal mines. There are abandoned power plants. There's an awful lot of locations that should get priority. Now, part of the Inflation Reduction Act does give priority to these brownfields. So
Right.
that's a thing to say, okay, you can get an extra 10% tax credit if you develop these. Problem is, typically, if you're a developer, you're going, hey, I want easy access. I want nice flat land. I don't want to have to
Yeah.
reclaim the
Well,
land. I
roads
don't
and
want to have
things.
to deal with the Environmental
Hmm.
Protection Agency with all of this mitigation of past sins because I'm going to be disrupting the soil. So you're going, you know what, actually that nice field of corn there is a nice place for me to go ahead and put solar. I understand their motivation, but I also understand that these people who are saying, let's not take farming out of production, discounting the agrivoltaics thing, have a certain point. But I think most of them are simply being manipulated by fossil fuel
I
industries.
agree, and the greening corporations love to do the greening thing. But if
Right.
people want to know a little bit more about some of the things that are going on with that, they could go online and look up Reimagine Appalachia because they're doing a lot of work to try to get in fossil fuel areas where buildings like you're describing or pieces of land that are brownfields and rooted in the pollution of coal and other fossil fuel extraction processes. They're doing stuff and they're doing a lot of cool stuff. So it's if you're interested, check them out. Reimagine Appalachia.
Okay, well, let's take a midway through station break here and remind everybody you are listening to When the Biomass Hit the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie
That's me.
Warmke.
Yeah.
Coming to you from Studio B, WOUB Radio in Athens, Ohio, reminding you it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
Thank God.
Thank God. Yes. The world as we know it is not sustainable. And I don't know if we're going to get through all these headlines. We've only got through a couple of them here so far. But, as the example where the red states thing, the example we have is Tennessee. In the last year, they've had $7 billion invested of capital expenditures in green energy or renewable energy, primarily electric vehicles, storage, solar. This represents 80% of all of the capital investment in that state. So 80% is clean energy in a
right. And it's very cool, state. Not to belabor this, but that is a part of Appalachia. Mm-hmm. And the Reimagine Appalachian people really, when the bills were written and passed, they put things in. They were able to get in things like must pay a living prevailing wage. So that's union influence. Woo-hoo, that's good. And also American-made products. And I don't know how they're monitoring that, but this has the potential to be a real game changer, particularly for rural communities.
Right. And that's why we're seeing a lot of this activity taking place in red states. Makes perfect sense. We're moving manufacturing back to America. So the places that have available workers, available infrastructure, you're not going to do it in the middle of New York City. You're going to say, all right, let's find a place. All right, well, let's jump to the next one.
We shouldn't care if it's a red state or a blue state,
I don't
because
care.
that money is available to every state. It just depends on who's bought enough of their Congress. People.
we need to be better at buying off politicians.
Yeah, but we aren't good.
Okay, so new analysis by S&P Global Commodities Insight. This time I have the actual name. I found this very encouraging. They're basically saying that by 2042, 75% of the energy consumed in the United States will come from renewable sources. That includes transportation. It includes
what
buildings.
What year is this?
2042.
Oh, 42.
But they're saying that number is locked in. They're saying regardless of policies, regardless
it'll be
of
at least
price,
that.
It'll be at least that.
Wow.
So they're just basically saying that is the base. But they are saying that to meet the goals, because Biden's goals are much more aggressive than that.
Right.
They're looking at 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. Now, this study is saying, you know what, that's probably not realistic, because in order to meet these goals, we've got to have a significant investment in hydrogen, in high-tech nuclear, in carbon sequestration, in a lot of these kind of technologies that are not going to get the investment if fossil fuel prices remain low. I think there's some serious barriers to hydrogen development, so I agree with them there. Nuclear, fine unless something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong. Dead. And so I think realistically, perhaps by 2040 we might see 80%, but fossil fuels will be with us for a good long time, but always diminishing.
Gonna employ a lot of child labor to reach their goals, aren't they?
I don't know where you jumped to that one.
Oh, because the Ohio being second in the production of solar panels, and they have children producing them. This is the thing,
Solar panels in Ohio produced by children?
No, they're not in Ohio, but they are being produced and brought here. And my point is this, that all of this isn't always a great
No, it's not
thing.
all green sunshine and unicorns, but we are seeing the majority of the manufacturing is being shipped back to the United States. I think what the COVID pandemic showed people in some sense of power, whatever you want to call that, is this idea of a global economy and just-in-time inventory and things of that nature simply doesn't work, because any disruption causes massive disruptions. Yeah. And we're in a world where we're always on a knife's edge. There's always the next big flat tire.
Well, we're not living resiliently at any level, and that's what COVID showed us.
Yeah. So now we're saying, okay, well, if the U.S. wants a dependable source of solar, a dependable source of microchips, a dependable source of all of these things that are essential to our economy, we better have it locally where we have the political control.
Right. But what about where are we going to get all those rare minerals to produce all that stuff?
Well, that's changing, and I'll jump to that one. All right, I'll jump to that one, because there's a new company opening up in Indianapolis, right?
Indiana,
right? It's a Singapore-based company. It's called, I've got it written here somewhere. It
is it
is
solar case?
Bila Solar, Bila Solar, and they're going to be manufacturing a glassless, frameless, thin silicone um, solar panel. So basically, this thing is 70% lighter than a typical solar panel. It's about 95% thinner, so uses much less materials. Its primary ingredients are essentially silicon and some silver, because that's what the wires are made of.
Right.
So that's been one of the issues: is how do you begin to reduce all the metal costs, the glass costs,
the extraction.
things like that?
I mean, silver is a horrible
well,
process.
silver is available. We'll get all those old,
but it's still a horrible
Ben Franklin
process.
dollars, and we'll melt them down and make solar. When we get into lithium issues, the Salton Sea in Southern California has essentially been determined to be like the Saudi Arabia of lithium.
Right.
And the U.S. may become the world's largest source of lithium. So that's encouraging, and it's in a place that's already destroyed.
Mess, yeah.
So that's not like we're going to be disrupting prime farmland. So there's the need for a lot of these things, but the mineral access, because all of these are being made out of things that are very abundant. Silicon is a very abundant material, but now we're moving into like perovskite and some of these other thin film technologies. First Solar is a thin film, so these things only use, it's like spray paint. You're not using a lot of material in these solar panels. So that's an area that we're moving to. And then, speaking of the global world, there has been a lawsuit that's been working its way through the courts. And again, all of this is news from this week, so it gives you a sense of how the industry is changing and modifying. This lawsuit was brought by Axim Solar, and basically what they said, let me back up because you're confused.
No, I'm not confused.
Okay,
I was trying to think of where I had heard of Axim Solar.
Axim Solar, probably this lawsuit. It's been around for a while. China years ago decided we want to capture the solar marketplace.
Right.
And so governmentally, they subsidized the development of silicon, the development of making solar cells, solar panels, and literally they have become the dominant source of all of these materials. China represents 83% of all the world's polysilicon. That's the refined silicon that people use to make computer chips and also solar panels. They are 96% of all of the solar wafers, and 79% of all the solar cells, and about 70% of the world's modules. So China is in a dominant position.
Yeah, but aren't they pretty vulnerable if they're being subsidized by the government?
Well, and that's always an issue. And in fact, what happened is back, I think it was 2012, they were found to be dumping at below cost prices solar panels in the United States, which put American producers out of business because I can't compete against a subsidized product. And so there was action taken. And in fact, eventually during the Trump administration, they put in tariffs against solar panels coming from China. So what did China do? They moved some of their production facilities to Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia.
Right. I'm familiar with all
So
that.
then there was a lawsuit brought by Axim saying, guys, pretty transparent. It's Chinese panel manufacturers with Chinese labor. All they did is just sort of picked up their plant and stuck it in another country. They're simply trying to avoid the tariffs. So that then led to the possibility that there would be serious fines if you bought panels from these companies, and they represented like 80% of the panels available. So you might be buying $1 million worth of solar panels and then finding out you have $1 million fine because you bought them from these companies. So what happened is all these companies just said, forget it, I'm not buying. And
from China,
from any of those plants, which was 80% of the market. So there was a severe and sudden disruption in the supply chain of solar panels, and the price skyrocketed and nobody could get them, and it would be months trying to get these solar panels. So then the Biden administration stepped in and said, you know what, we're going to put a 2-year moratorium on these fines as we try and get manufacturing established here domestically in the US. So don't worry about it. You're not going to get penalized if you buy these things. And then in the meantime, they found out that the Chinese were using slave labor in the Uyghur district for all of this. And then they said, oh, well, we're not going to import anything from that district, which caused another disruption. But then the Inflation Reduction Act came along, and a lot of the manufacturing is moving here, but it takes a year, 2 years to set up a plant. So all of these things started happening. Well, then what happened is China said, well, we can't sell these things to the US. Let's sell them to Europe. So they're dumping all these things into Europe, and Europe's prices are going down. The US's prices going up a little bit. It's a mess. And now China is saying, just like Russia did when Europe refused to buy natural gas, or they threatened to cut them off if they supported the Ukraine, China's going, you know what, America, we might just cut you off. And that's causing some disruption. So it's basically forcing everything to become domestically manufactured, which is good for American workers, good for the industry.
Absolutely.
But it's going to increase the price of some of these things in the short term. But we keep seeing technology changing and developing to where prices are constantly going down. But there's got to be a limit. There will be a limit at some point.
Well, and our government is doing some subsidizing, like in poor neighborhoods and stuff, where they're making solar available in different ways, so that they're actually paying for part of the installation, and especially with landlords and things. So
yeah,
there is something, as you say, there's all this stuff happening over here, but then there's things happening over here too.
Well, and this is part of a what to my eyes is a logical and pretty clever plan by the administration right now to completely change and revamp our electrical system. And all these tax policies are going together. They're trying to incentivize it. They've got a carrot and stick approach. And I think a couple decades from now, we're going to look back at this period and say, you know what, that was pretty amazing. Just like the development of the interstate highway system changed America, this is as big a project to change the way our electrical grid moves and processes and how things are developed. And I mean, it's astounding. It's going to be,
right.
It's pretty amazing. And those guys, pretty clever, I think.
Yeah, and the administration's doing the same thing with broadband with poorer people as well, trying to get them online. Using the internet. Yeah, so there's stuff going on at every level that's positive.
Okay, well, you have been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, coming to you from Studio B, WOUB Radio. We want to thank our always evolving and always changing producer, Adam Rich. And we want to thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is?
Play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and eat your veggies, Jay. That's super important.
All right. Till next time. Bye-bye.